Tonight, NATO's chief heads to Ukraine.
Ukraine's rightful place is in NATO.
The Secretary General's first time visiting Kyiv since Russia's full-scale invasion highlights NATO's commitment to defend the war-torn country.
Plus, the Supreme Court's abortion pill ruling on hold. And hell on earth, why Haiti's reputation as a failed state is growing.
Apart from military intervention from another country, I would say revival. A good old-fashioned revival would be the only thing I could see that could turn this country around.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Is NATO membership coming for Ukraine? Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. NATO's Secretary General was in Kyiv today, marking his first visit since the Russian invasion began more than a year ago. Jens Stoltenberg met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to discuss military aid and Ukraine's potential future in the NATO alliance.
The visit coincides with ongoing investigations into Russian war crimes and atrocities. CBN National Security Correspondent Caitlin Burke joins us now. Caitlin, how is Moscow responding to today's visit?
John, Jenna, even before the war began, Russia's Vladimir Putin made clear his stance on Ukraine staying out of NATO. Today, a Kremlin spokesperson called any Ukrainian move to join the military alliance a serious, significant threat to Russia's national security. Meanwhile, NATO's Secretary General sees Ukraine's membership as imminent.
Let me be clear. Ukraine's rightful place is in the Euro-Atlantic family. Ukraine's rightful place is in NATO. And over time, our support will help you make this possible.
The NATO leader's visit is symbolic of the alliance's commitment to helping Kyiv defend itself, support that will continue for as long as it takes.
We must continue to strengthen Ukraine's armed forces, and we must ensure that robust, powerful arrangements are in place for Ukraine's security.
In Washington, lawmakers heard firsthand testimony of Russian war crimes and human rights abuses.
In January of this year, they came for me. And they took me to their torture chamber and kept me there for 5 days. This was terrible. I was beaten, forced me to undress, cutting my body with a knife and threatening to rape and kill me. Also forced me to dig my own grave.
Representative Mike McCall, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, says Russia has made clear its intention to wipe out Ukraine's existence.
These are more than war crimes. These are more than crimes against humanity. What we are witnessing in Ukraine is genocide.
McCall also referred to the thousands of children kidnapped and deported to Russia.
Tens of thousands of children have been kidnapped, handed over to Russian families, and forced into pro-Russian re-education systems.
CBN News spoke with Natalia Kamyak of Orphans Promise about the kidnappings. She says Vladimir Putin actually changed adoption laws to make it easier to place these children with Russian families.
These children have been taken into summer camps. They have been taken from orphanages. Majority of them do have living parents or relatives.
Lawmakers from both parties agree Russia is committing crimes against humanity in Ukraine. Meanwhile, with ongoing support from the U.S., NATO, and other countries, Ukraine is expected to launch a counteroffensive against Russia this spring. John, Jenna?
All right, CBN's Caitlin Burke. Thank you so much, Caitlin. Well, here with us now is John Hardy, Deputy Director, Foundation for Defense and Democracy's Russia program. John, welcome. So Ukraine is not a member of the Transatlantic Military Alliance, yet NATO is involved in the defense of Ukrainians in Russia's ongoing war. John, we just saw the backdrop today between those two leaders' flags, Ukrainian flag and NATO flag. Is Ukraine already a NATO member in everything but name only?
Well, thanks for having me on. It's great to be with you. I think that is how Kyiv is trying to present itself. It rightly makes the point that by defending itself from Russia, it's actually protecting the rest of Europe from Russia. If Ukraine were to fall, it might be Poland that was waging that war. So in a sense, I think Ukraine is really fighting NATO's battle. And in that sense, I think Ukraine tries to present itself as de facto a member of the alliance.
Yeah, you know, it's hearing Jens Stoltenberg so staunchly support Ukraine and saying it should join NATO is a pretty stark contrast to what we were saying maybe a year ago when a lot of members were saying this would cause a third world war. Do you think that Ukraine will, in fact, join NATO?
I think the practical road is tough, and if I had to bet on it, I wouldn't bet within the next 5 years it will happen. I was enthused to hear Mr. Stoltenberg say that, though. I think it is the right goal to have for Ukraine to be in NATO. I don't think there really can be peace and stability on the European continent unless that happens, because we know Mr. Putin's intentions for Ukraine. He wants to subsume it into Russia, and as long as Ukraine doesn't have that Article 5 commitment of all for one, one for all, to deter Russia, Putin's just going to keep going. So I think, you know, NATO membership has to be the goal. There'll be many within NATO who try to block it, Hungary and others. But we need to figure out, you know, in the meantime, practical steps we can take to ease that process and to bring Ukraine along.
The 30-member alliance of NATO has grown since the start of the invasion, Finland becoming the 31st and Sweden may be next. At the outset of the war, one of Russia's goals was to weaken NATO. In the few seconds we have left, John, has the Ukraine war only served to strengthen it?
I think it has. You've really seen NATO rally around its mission of deterring Russia and supporting Ukraine. And it's a unity that really has been eluding the alliance for, you know, really since the end of the Cold War.
All right, John Hardy with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much, John. Great to have you tonight.
Thank you.
Well, in other news, House Republicans passed a bill today banning transgender athletes from women's sports. The measure would amend the federal civil rights law, Title IX. The so-called Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act would change Title IX to recognize a person's sex as the one assigned at birth. It would also threaten funding to any facility receiving federal money that allows a transgender athlete to play on a women's or girls' team.
There's a reason why Title IX was created. There's a reason why there's men and women's sports. There's a reason why there's a professional basketball for men and women. It's about fairness.
Trans kids are all God's children, belong in sports, in schools, in books, in families, and on teams.
And the Republican bill passed along party lines. It's unlikely the Senate will take up the legislation. And the White House says the president would veto it if it ever got to his desk.
To another divisive issue, a much anticipated Supreme Court decision on access to a widely used abortion pill is set to come tomorrow night. For now, though, mifepristone is still available to women across America. The High Court is reviewing a federal judge's order saying that decades ago, the FDA improperly rushed the approval process of the abortion drug. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned that ruling, though upholding some restrictions. The Biden administration appealed to the High Court, trying to preserve full access for mifepristone, which is used in more than half of all abortions in the United States.
And with that, let's bring in Penny Nance, President and CEO of Concerned Women for America. Penny, good to see you this evening. So let's start with mifepristone and this coming ruling. How do you think the court will rule here? What are you hearing?
Well, it's impossible to know. I've given up, having a crystal ball for these things for the Supreme Court. But really, I think what we've got to look back at is the fact that the FDA, like many other drugs, caved to public pressure, caved to really political pressure, and made legal a drug called mifepristone that would basically create would starve a baby of, its ability to have life. And, we've found that since that time, there have been numerous women who have died. About 25 women have died. We know that there have been a huge spike in women who have gone to the emergency room, although we don't know exactly the number because the FDA no longer requires reporting on this drug. It started out that this drug had to be administered as only as early, had to be taken before 7 weeks, and a woman had to be seen by a doctor in 3 visits, and then a visit after the miscarriage or the abortion. And then during COVID took away any ability or any reason for a doctor to be involved, and basically made it a telemed situation. 2% of pregnancies are tubal pregnancies, basically. And, you know, that is a dangerous situation. So that's why we've seen the spike in women having to go to the emergency room. So it is not a safe drug. It has not been dispensed in a safe way. And the very people that claim to care about women are allowing something to go forward in a very unsafe way. So we're hoping that the Supreme Court will take this under advisement, understand, number one, there are states in which the legislature who have been elected by the people have said they do not want abortion even as early as 7 weeks or 10 weeks. And then the case that, you know, of safety on this drug, at the very least, FDA should have to actually go back through and do what they should have done in the early 2000, and that would be rigorous testing and really making sure that this is safe. It's not safe for the baby, but at least safe for the woman. We don't even know that. At the time, there wasn't much chemical abortion, but of course that spiked during COVID and, you know, when there weren't doctors involved. And so we've seen, you know, of course, we've seen more numbers of women suffering.
Nancy, real quickly here, you were there on hand for the passing of the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. It's not likely to pass in the Senate. Joe Biden said he would veto it if it reaches his desk. So what's next in the battle?
Well, I think your viewers need to understand that there's an opportunity for them to go online and to actually comment on President Biden's regulations on this. So there's a couple things happening. We have President Biden trying to put this into law within agencies and make it illegal for any school to say that a child must only compete on their same sex sport. But at the same time, we have, you know, Greg Steube trying to work alongside the Republicans. And this was really a Republican and Democratic. Not one Democrat voted in the House for this bill.
Right.
And if we're going to protect women, it's a matter of fairness. As Christians, we know that God created male and female. And we can deny that all we want, but that is reality. That's biology as well as biblical worldview.
Penny, we're going to have to leave it there. Penny Nance with Concerned Women for America, thank you so much for your time, and we'll be right back after the break.
Thanks.
Welcome back. The president is rejecting House Speaker Kevin McCarthy's plan to raise the debt ceiling. But one key Democratic senator is signaling he's on board with the Republicans' proposal. As time runs out before a possible U.S. default on its whopping $31.4 trillion debt, a new projection from the Bipartisan Policy Center, in line with previous CBO forecasts, points to a default as soon as July or into September of this year, prompting new calls for compromise on both sides of the aisle. Today, in a statement, West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin came out in support of McCarthy's proposal that he says would, quote, prevent default and rein in federal spending, adding that while I do not agree with everything proposed, it is the only bill that would prevent default.
Well, for more now, let's bring in Mark Hamrick, the Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst for Bankrate. Mark, always great to see you. So that we're all on the same page, can you explain what is a government default, since most of us in the United States have never experienced that? And then can you describe the economic consequences if the U.S. defaults on its debt obligations?
Good to see you, John and Jenna. The U.S. has never defaulted on its obligations, and the hope is it never will. That's something that much less substantial countries have been involved with, those that do not have the economic might or even the value system or strength of democracy that our country has prided itself on. But essentially what we're talking about there is that the government is no longer able to pay its obligations. And this is something that is seen as potentially economically catastrophic. Think about it affecting everybody from members of the military to those on the receiving end of Social Security payments. And we saw the risk of what happens if people can't get access to payroll when we went through the Silicon Valley bank collapse, because that was seen as essentially the major risk that all these companies, among their many customers, including individuals, by the way, couldn't get access potentially to their bank accounts. And that alone was seen as causing too much of a problem. And so I think that we should look at this opening gambit on the part of the House Speaker as the opening round of negotiations. And as we get closer to the date where a default is more of an actual reality, I hope and pray that the negotiations will take on more seriousness.
Yeah, we'll be watching it closely, that's for sure. Well, today we got the latest jobless claims report, Mark. Unemployment claims on the rise last week, signaling an easing in the labor market. What does that mean for the Fed's plan for continued interest rate hikes to curb inflation?
Yeah, great question, Jenna. We have that meeting of the Federal Reserve coming up in early May, about 2 weeks away, and the expectation is they'll raise interest rates one more time. The job market is still seen as tight. It's moderating. It is weakening. We're seeing an increasing number of people filing for unemployment benefits, but the Fed still is prioritizing the fight against inflation, and so just one more rate hike at least is seen as the expectation.
And real quickly here, you just mentioned SVB and some of the other bank failures. Your anticipation, do you expect federal officials to continue to act from what they've been learning about the fallout from those bank failures?
A number of investigations are underway. The Fed will be delivering its own investigation, which has been run by its vice chair for supervision in the coming days and weeks. And so there's a lot more to learn here. And as we know, if there's one thing Washington likes to do, it's investigate.
All right, Mark Hamrick with Bankrate. Thank you so much, Mark. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Well, hell on earth. That's how the people of Haiti describe their home. Up next, how the failed state could be turned around.
Welcome back. As many as 40 million Americans are facing the threat of severe weather tonight. That after deadly storms devastated parts of the central United States Wednesday, when tornadoes, high winds, and hail hit parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, and Iowa, killing at least 2 and injuring others. The storms destroyed homes and left thousands without power. Warnings from the National Weather Service directed people in those areas to shelter. With twisters devastating parts of the South and Midwest, this is one of the worst years on record for tornadoes.
Well, turning overseas, no president, no government, and a powerless police force. Haiti is described by its residents as hell on earth.
With armed and violent gangs in charge of the capital, some are calling for a special international force to intervene. Chuck Holton reports.
Haiti's reputation as a failed state is growing. In January, its last 10 elected senators stepped down, leaving the Caribbean country without a functioning government. The result is anarchy as armed and violent gangs rule the streets. Jimmy Cherizier, whose street name is Barbecue, is known as Haiti's most powerful and feared gang leader. In his neighborhood, called La Saline, he's the closest thing to law these people know. Barbecue considers himself a community leader.
I'm not a thief. I'm not involved in kidnapping. I'm not a rapist. I'm just carrying out a social fight to claim a better life for all the people in the world.
Better known internationally as a criminal, his G9 gang took control of this Haitian fuel depot late last year, while it caused even more misery in a place already described by residents as hell on earth. He says they did it to try and force change.
You, in your country, if you were living in these conditions as in La Saline, if you saw the conditions in which our people are living, wouldn't you revolt?
With little to no organized government, Haiti's embattled police force is virtually powerless. In January alone, 15 cops died battling the gangs. That sparked violent protests from the police themselves.
We need a revolution. We need to have a bloodbath. We're in the streets to fight for our brothers and sisters who are victimized by the bandits, and we have to take to the streets every day to get what we want.
The violence has forced many U.S. missions here to severely curtail work in the country. In 2019, Dr. Doug Burbella was on his 35th mission trip here when gang members shot him at a roadblock. At the time, Burbella thought his life was over.
I just want you to know I love you, and I love you, Michael. Michael, I want you to be a pilot. Don't ever give up that dream, leave for the war.
Miraculously, he's made a full recovery, although his Haiti ministry is stalled because of the situation on the ground.
We're almost out of food, so we generally feed thousands of kids every day, and we can't get a shipping container from the shipping port up to the northwest. It's impossible right now. Gas stations are closed, so even if we had access to a truck and it made it through the roadblocks, we can't even buy fuel.
With options dwindling, many Haitians are fleeing across their shared border with the Dominican Republic, including some of Dr. Burbella's friends.
And they're in fear for their lives. They watched people get killed in front of their house in Port-au-Prince, so we helped them flee to the DR.
Today, nearly 25% of the total population of the DR is made up of Haitians, over 2 million of whom are there illegally.
What you see here is the main border crossing between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, where I'm standing. A lot of people come across here during the day to shop in this buffer zone between the two countries, and they can come and go at will if they like. But if they want to go any further into the DR, they have to have a special visa. That's getting harder and harder to obtain because there are so many illegal immigrants inside the Dominican Republic. It's become too costly for them, and they're taking a very tough stand on those illegal crossers to the point that they're actually building a wall like we see on the U.S. southern border.
The United Nations recently called for military intervention in Haiti, but the U.S. has already intervened here 19 times in Haiti's history without much to show for it. For his part, Dr. Burbella says there's only one way things will improve.
Apart from military intervention from another country, I would say revival. A good old-fashioned revival would be the only thing I could see that could turn this country around.
From the Haitian border in the Dominican Republic, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Thanks, Chuck. Coming up, unexpected excitement in the launch of SpaceX's Starship rocket. Next on Faith Nation.
All right, finally tonight, practice makes perfect, and space exploration is no exception.
That's right. Early this morning, SpaceX launched the first flight test of Starship, the largest rocket ever developed, going almost according to plan. As if the flight wasn't exciting enough, Starship self-destructed minutes after launching in what SpaceX called a rapid unscheduled disassembly. The rocket carried no people or satellites, and attempting a round-the-world trip from Texas. Elon Musk's SpaceX says success comes from what we learn, and today's test will help teams prepare for the next test in just a few months from now.
Yeah, you know, today I saw a video of the team, and they were cheering so loudly, even when it went up in flames. And I think the point is, yeah, they learned a lot in this process.
It just reminds me, if you don't succeed, try again, and apparently that's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for watching.
Have a good night.